in the Crimean region, which is currently under Russian control. He'll join us in a moment to tell us exactly what he saw. But first, the latest. Earlier today, the EU and the United States suggested we may slap economic sanctions on Russia if Putin doesn't back off. Russia immediately retaliated with a threat to take U.S. and EU assets currently held in Russia. That tit-for-tat prompted a meeting between Secretary of State Kerry and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in Paris. That meeting appears to have accomplished exactly zero. German Chancellor Angela Merkel, a strategic trading partner, called Putin's moves out of touch. And in the meantime, Hillary Clinton compared Vlad Putin to Adolf Hitler. Folks, the mood is tense, the region unstable. But let's bring it around the table and talk about the political ramifications going on with all this stuff. New breaking news. Bob, I'm going to start with you. Your thoughts on everything that's happening in 24.
First of all, I think the EU stepped forward quickly, more quickly than I thought. You know, what the Russians have said is they ought to stick to an agreement with the EU that was made by the former president, which will not happen. It's interesting to me that these elections somebody will be elected who will be pro-Western. The former president, who's now hiding out in the Soviet Union, did a deal with the Russians to extend their lease on their naval base for about 25 years. It was supposed to be up in 2017. That will not happen. Be curious to see what Putin does with that. The second thing it strikes me is that so far as I can tell, maybe Shep can fill us in on this, but I don't think that they've moved more troops to the border, with the border of Crimea and Ukraine.
Okay. All right. And let me ask you a little bit about this. The $15 billion that the EU promised to help Ukraine out with the situation, is that enough? Is the $1 billion that we're offering enough? Should we even be involved in this?
I don't think it's going to be enough. We can give them the money, but I still don't think that it changes the reality that Russia has such a fear over that region. So I do think it's a bit of wasted money. I'm not as bullish on the sanctions as maybe Bob is. I just think any sanctions will be pretty weak. And it is a mutually beneficial, though, relationship with the EU and Russia. If they are serious about it, which, again, I'm skeptical that the Germans and the French who sent them Navy warships are really serious, Putin still needs the Europeans' money. Mm-hmm. So it's almost like us with China. So, again, I'm very skeptical at today's developments that the EU will be able to really buckle down and put the screws to somebody who is playing a real game that I think is going to turn out quite messy.
Can I do this? In the intro, we talked about Hillary Clinton comparing, or somewhat comparing, Vladimir Putin to Adolf Hitler. She responded to that just moments ago. Literally, we just got this tape cut. Take a listen.
What I said yesterday is that the claims by President Putin and other Russians that they had to go into Crimea and maybe further into eastern Ukraine because they had to protect the Russian minorities. And that is reminiscent of claims that were made back in the 1930s when Germany under the Nazis kept talking about how they had to protect German minorities.
Greg, Hillary Clinton doubling down on the original claim.
Does she have any idea that Putin is nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize? How offensive this is? This could affect his chances. I doubt it, though. This might actually help him win the Nobel Prize. But, you know, she's touching on something about the Russians that is interesting to me, which is their ability to play I hate to use the phrase long ball or the long game. Their plan, really, is to outlast our attention span. If you've ever seen a Russian book, War and Peace is 1,400 pages. It's 560,000 words. That's what they read. Meanwhile, we're proud if we finish green eggs and ham. So everything is in the long haul for them. And what?
On the Senate floor, no.
On the Senate floor. So that's how they look at us. They look at us as rather superficial, and we're in the long term. But I would say this to President Obama. Forget standing up to Putin. Stand up to the anti-American left-wing radicals here and drill your butt off.
Dana, Bob mentioned something yesterday or the day before, and we talked a little bit about it yesterday also. The possibility of cutting a deal, elevating Ukraine to NATO, or at least speeding up the process. Your thoughts on something like that?
I've always thought that expanding NATO was the most important thing for Ukraine and Georgia, but that's partly because during the Bush administration, the president pushed for that, and I understood why. President Obama hasn't pushed for that, and in fact, one of the reasons is because the EU says they blocked it in April of 2008. So there wasn't a reason to really talk about it. If that is actually going to be something President Obama wants to try to get behind now and push, it's going to be difficult, but I would support that action. I think that that would be helpful. I do wonder about NATO's resilience when it comes to the Baltic states, in particular Latvia, expressing concern today. So if I could just make one other point about the EU and the United States. One of the concerns last night, and we understand the close financial ties that the EU has with Russia, tells me that we should really get behind giving the president trade promotion authority and finalizing agreements, in particular the one that is on the table right now with the EU. We should be able to at least do that so that we can strengthen our own financial ties as we figure out the energy position of this.
I want to jump to the soundbite from last night's Hannity show, Donald Rumsfeld and Colonel Peters talking about the situation. Take a listen.
Vladimir Putin believes in Russia. He believes in Russia's destiny, its mission. Obama does not believe in American exceptionalism.
We're sending a signal that America's weak, that we're in decline, and weakness is provocative. We've created a leadership vacuum in the world. It's being filled by Putin, and it'll be filled by other Putin-like people. Putin's punching so far above his weight class, and the United States isn't punching at all. We don't have a foreign policy. We don't have a strategy.
Camera 3 right now. Bob, what about it?
That's the same Rumsfeld who went into Iraq with not enough troops, forced George Bush to have a surge in there. He was ousted because he was a lousy Secretary of Defense. The fact that this guy would be talking about strength from given the fact that he went in and did something, and it was him who said we'll have a.
Can we focus on this?
Okay, I'm just saying that Rumsfeld is the wrong guy. The other guy I don't know, but Rumsfeld is exactly the wrong guy to be listening to.
Lieutenant Colonel, just talk about yeah, they were both on Hannity last night. Is it true? Are we punching at all? And frankly, should we be punching?
Are you asking me that?
Yeah. That's what they said.
I think we should be punching in a deal-making because, as I said before, I don't think they're leaving the Crimea. I don't think they will, and I don't think if they don't, we ought to get something out of it.
Well, there's this other idea that if you say that President Obama is weak, that means that you're saying that Putin is strong. That's been the criticism. That's not true. Saying Obama is weak helps Obama because that's the point. For so long, his pals have coddled him like a fragile child with food allergies. We're actually trying to say, look, dude, there's real stuff here. Putin proves that a leopard doesn't change his spots. He just eats the leopard. Angela Merkel in Germany, very important, not only trading partner, but also a strategic partner with Vladimir Putin. They have a very good relationship. Kind of interesting that she took a shot at him today.
That's right. If Germany, I think, gets out in front of this in a real way, I think a lot of the other countries in the EU will fall in line. So I'm interested to see if she's going to continue that tone with Putin. The irony here is Russia's actually a pretty weak country. Its nukes mask the fact that it's only really a regional power. The situation in the Ukraine, though, tells, I think, every regional thug, though, that school is out and nobody is going to come push the gang that sieged the backyard of the Ukraine. And that's really the message. What also is ironic is President Obama, I think, very well has no problem going after the rich in this country. He does it very tactfully on domestic issues. But he looks like a dunce on the international stage. And the irony here with this situation is the president of the Ukraine essentially raided the Ukrainian treasury to build these lavish palaces that are on the cover of every tabloid internationally. If President Obama would assault him for what he is verbally and take to the bully pulpit like he does very well, calling him a dictator and a liar and a thief of a kleptocracy, right, I think he could start to make Putin's base squirm a little bit.
Can I get Danny in here before we go to Shep? He's standing by. Your thought, John McCain said it's a massive failure on our intel part to not know that Putin was going to do what he did. Is there any way of knowing what's in Putin's mind?
Well, there might have been some missed signals. We'll maybe find out later on. Right now, I think the most important thing is to deal with the crisis and to understand that the president needs to tell us where he wants to go. So he sets the foreign policy in the country. So let's have it, and then we'll decide if we can get behind it. I think that supporting the president in this time is an important thing, but he's got to tell us what does he want to do.
I think Hillary realized that the reset button is spelled with 2 S's.
Yeah.
All right, I'll figure that out in the break while we talk to Shep. Let's get some perspective from Shep, who's just returned from a journey into the Crimean region. Mind you, that region is controlled by Putin's forces. Shep, give us the lowdown.
Well, the Russians are saying they're not controlling it if their soldiers aren't in there. That's not true. We went to a naval facility today where the Russians are in complete control. The Ukrainians who normally man that had to give up their weapons. They want that the wives of those Ukrainians go in to visit them, according to all the accounts there. They also took over 2 strategic defense areas today. The Russians control the Crimea. They're lying about it on the world stage. There's no question about it.
Shep, this is Bob. Do you think, having looked at this and getting a sense about what the Russians in Crimea, that is to say the people who live there who have Russian lineage, are they prepared to go autonomous and break away from the Ukraine?
I've not heard anybody say that. I've heard those who grew up in large part under the Soviet regime who say we'd rather be Soviets, we'd rather be with the Russians. But a lot of these people who are causing the protests, we don't know whether they're actually people who live in Ukraine in the Crimea or if they're people who've been brought in from Russia to stage these protests. We don't really have a way to know that, and the locals don't seem to be willing to talk about that.
Shep, it's Dana. Just curious what you're hearing on the ground from either U.S. officials or Europeans about the importance of international law and territorial borders and making sure that those are respected. I mean, is there any sort of principle being discussed here, or it just feels like it's get a deal done and then walk away and hope it just doesn't go any further?
Well, Dana, I keep hearing, I heard from Secretary of State John Kerry tonight that, in fact, the territorial integrity must be respected, that they must not do this. Well, they've done it. The question now is, how do you undo it, or can you undo it? What might push them back out of the Crimea? Why would they do such a thing? The Russians seem to have a lot of leverage over a lot of people. The oil, about which Eric has spoken so often, and the natural gas especially, which comes right through the Ukraine and supplies Germany and so much of the rest of Europe. And they have a lot of leverage on us as well, especially when you consider this road that goes right through Russia that takes food to our troops in the war in Afghanistan, and on and on and on. He seems to, at least as an observer, have a lot of leverage.
Hey, Shep, so far it seems to me like it's been a pretty quiet invasion. Are they just moving in? Is there any resistance? Is it pure ambivalence?
No, well, I don't know if it's ambivalence, or because what the Ukrainians are saying is if we had tried to resist, we don't have the forces to do so, but if we had tried to, that might have played right into Putin's hands, because then Putin would have been able to spread and say, we have to do this now. At this moment, it's bloodless. There's been no resistance, when resistance would have been futile anyway. I don't know whether their strategy is a good one or a bad one, but that seems to be what it is. Now they've just set up camp and taken over buildings. It is a surreal thing to see, where the people who used to run these buildings are now forced to give up their weapons and just stand there while the Russians run the show. I can't imagine being in such a position. I bet they couldn't have before now either.
Hey, Shep, there was a sense today that Vladimir Putin started to tamper his rhetoric a little bit, maybe tone it back. And I heard on this network a lot of people say, oh, he's just posturing. What's the sense on the ground over there?
Well, the sense on the ground here seems to be Putin, at least for this moment, has won. If what he wanted to do was get his warm water port to the Black Sea there in the south, and if what he wanted to do was gain control there in the Crimea, a breadbasket in a very strategically important place, then for the moment at least he's won. And once you've won, why not shut up and let those you've beaten do all the talking? That's the theory that we're hearing here. I don't know what the fact is, but on the ground, that's what the locals seem to think, except, of course, those who want these Russian ties. And those are the ones we met in Crimea. Many are very happy about this.
Shep, just one very fast question. You've been there a couple of days now. Do you think that the Russians are going to leave the Crimea, or is this now a done deal?
I don't have any idea, but as you look at the facts and who has leverage, why would you leave? You have to have a reason to leave. If somebody in Europe or the United States comes up with some leverage that where it would behoove him to do so, then I would think he probably would. But unless and until that happens, why would you?
Hey, Shep, we got to go. Just give us a sense. Now we talk about the pipeline, 3 big pipelines that go through Ukraine to supply Western and even Eastern Europe. But really, what the Russians, the way I understand it, they're interested in that deep water port in the Crimean region. They want access to that to be able to use those shipping lanes. Am I wrong?
Of course they do. They have a long-term lease there, which the previous government, Yanukovych, had extended, and I think you guys mentioned that. That's not going to be continued anymore, obviously, if they get a new government in here. But they don't have any other warm water ports. That's their way out, and their fleet has been down there for a long time out of an agreement with the Ukrainian government. He needs it, and for now he has it.
That's right. So strategically, that's a very important port to them. We're going to have to leave it there. Shep, doing a great job for us. We really appreciate your time.
You bet.
All right, we'll leave it right there. Up next, guess who made her way back to Capitol Hill today? Lois Lerner, the former IRS official who pleaded the Fifth last year when asked about the targeting of conservative groups. She talked. Did you think she talked this time? We'll find out. Plus, why Democrat Elijah Cummings exploded after Darrell Issa adjourned the hearing. You'll see this all when the 5 returns.